Hello, everybody. We're back again with a Wild Roof podcast episode. And today we have a poet and novelist and writer of nonfiction as well. We can cover all the bases with Marybeth Holleman. Marybeth, you may recognize from the Wild Roof Journal issues, including the most current at this point, issue 30, which includes her poem Held. I can go through a little bit of Marybeth's writing history. The book we're going to be talking about today is fiction. It's called Bloom Again, and it's a novel that was really just released quite recently. So that'll be the main event for today's talk. But she's also the author of the poetry collection Tender Gravity, co-author of Among Wolves, Insights into Alaska's Most Misunderstood Animal, and the author of The Heart of the Sound, An Alaskan Paradise Found and Nearly Lost, and then co-editor of Cross Currents North, which is a collection of poems and essays all centering around the Alaskan environment. Like I said, we kind of cover some pretty interesting territory, literally and figuratively, I suppose. And just to get a little bit of insight into your background, obviously Alaska was a big part of your published writing, but you did have a start in North Carolina, which plays into the novel as well. So, where are you from, and how does your background in terms of location get us into the novel, just in those terms?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Ashley. I really appreciate you having me on today. I love Wild Roof Journal, and I'm happy to have had some poems in it, and just think it's a great thing you guys are doing. So thank you for all that you do. So I grew up in North Carolina. I grew up in Asheville in the mountains. Then I went to school in Chapel Hill, UNC Chapel Hill, which one of the characters is a professor there. And then, like many college students there at that time, I kind of hung around for many years afterwards. So I lived there for a little over a decade. But, it was when I was in Chapel Hill in college, like for many people, when you leave home in whatever capacity, you leave the house and your family, you start to really find yourself and find out what it is you're interested in. And I started out in international studies because I wanted to travel. And so I was taking all these language classes, but I took a course from an environmental policy professor that just really changed my trajectory. And I ended up with a group of some other students creating like a multidisciplinary degree called environmental studies, which at the time didn't exist anywhere as a name. But now, of course, a lot of universities have it. But, I just took courses in all kinds of disciplines. So I traveled in different disciplines rather than different countries. And then after my degree, I worked for a while in policy, renewable energy in North Carolina, thinking sort of naively that if the science could just be transmitted to the politicians, that the world would change. Voila. And then I started realizing how much writing had affected me. Some of the books that I'd read, some of the literature that I'd read my whole life. I was always a reader. And so I got the urge to write myself. I never really thought of being a writer until I was, in my 20s. So I started with nonfiction, and I moved to Alaska. We were just traveling around the country for a while. I fully expected to go back to Chapel Hill and our 10 acres of land there, which I loved, but we ended up in Alaska and got jobs for the summer and then got curious about the winter and then just ended up staying, just year after year. And finally, I've been here, longer than I was there. Yeah. So much of my writing since has centered around Alaska, The Heart of the Sound is a memoir about Prince William Sound. A lot of my poems are from centered in Alaska, like the one Held that's in the current issue is about bull kelp, and paddling and looking down at the bull kelp and imagining the life there. So this novel is fun for me because it takes me back to my roots in North Carolina. It takes place equally in Alaska and in North Carolina. One main character in Alaska, the other in North Carolina. So it's kind of a way for me to imagine, what if I'd stayed? What if I'd stayed and gotten that degree in botany? So anyhow, that's been my journey so far.
Thanks. Yeah. And I should take a moment to introduce our other participant today, Ashley Cundiff, reader slash collaborator with Wild Reef Journal. So hello, Ashley. And yeah, I think that just kind of the first avenue we'll take and go from there is just like, even in your brief background, like you have an involvement or had an involvement in kind of the scientific realm, putting these in very general kind of like categories that if you read the book, and obviously come to find they're not so clear cut. But you have, background in kind of the scientific realm, and then a background in the creative and artistic realm. And that's part of the idea of the novel, is to put these two in a collision course with each other. So like what, and even just back to your experience, like how was your experience navigating those two worlds? You mentioned, yeah, just if we could just, present the information to the politicians or the public, then the light bulb would go off and everybody would understand. That didn't that didn't happen and continues not to happen. How did the route go between those two?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I was in the sciences first, and I worked in environmental science department in Chapel Hill for researchers that were actually studying. They had these big outdoor chambers, and they put gases into them and see how they interacted. So that was, they were doing climate science then. And then I really just, I was playing around with writing. And then I came to Alaska. I continued to work in the social sciences for many years here, but I was getting a degree, an MFA degree at the same time. And I guess I've always been a generalist. That idea. I mean, some people they want, like one of my friends in Chapel Hill, I always think of him. Like he went into botany, and then he studied one kind of algae that grows in one place in the southeastern United States. And he loved it. I mean, and that was his life, and that was his passion. But for me, I've just always been about, I want to learn about everything. Like I just, I'm insatiable. But so it's fun. I found in creative writing, you get to do that. You get to study whatever you want. Like one of my characters in Bloom Again, Professor Striley, is works on the theory of everything, which I got to spend some time when I was writing this novel, just doing this deep dive into what that is. Don't ask me too much about it now because I don't tend to hold all that very well, but it helped me to write the novel. But so I just think I'm a generalist, and I think that the interplay of art and science is really important. I think that we used to all be generalists, like Leonardo da Vinci. We didn't think of him as a scientist or an artist. He just did whatever he was inspired to do. And a lot of it is scientific and a lot of it is artistic. So we started to kind of put ourselves into little categories. But I think that idea of working with both of them is just really important. I think that the intersections of art and science are very full of potential. I think a lot of untapped potential, because it's hard for people to step out of their comfort zone, especially if you're a scientist working at a university, it's hard, or with an institution, it's hard to be allowed to do certain things, or if you're an artist, what the artistic community expects of you. So anyhow, I really enjoyed working on that in this novel because it's a lot of what I've been thinking about for a long time.
I love that. I'm sort of a champion dabbler myself in a lot of different fields. And I love that idea of being able to do, that's what the humanities is, being able to do a little bit of everything. I love that idea. And I think in the book too, art and science at first are kind of contrasting, but then they seem to work together. So would you almost say that like we kind of think of climate as a science problem, but is it also an art problem? Is it a humanities problem?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I'm glad that you saw that in the book. And I did, mean for those worlds to, start out very contrasty and then collide and then, resolve. But I think that art is essential to it because a lot of this is about a crisis of the imagination. And we're all creative. I was talking to, I'm doing my launch events with a group here called Trustees for Alaska. They're environmental lawyers, and so they represent environmental issues in Alaska against the current administration. It's really tough. And I was talking to their communications director about my event, and I was saying, about creativity and like the kind of legal stuff that you guys do. And she said, well, the lawyers have to be really creative too, because they're trying to figure out how to do what they think they need, what they think is right, given all these changing regulations, given all these changing structures around them. So I think we're all being forced to be more creative, but I think that art has a way of coming in at a different angle of light. Like if you think about science coming sort of straight at us, it's facts, it's clear, it's very intellectual, it's very left brain. Art kind of filters in a different way. Like when you stand in front of a painting, especially if it's abstract art that's untitled, you really don't have any intellectual clues. It's just whatever it feels like to you. And there's so many works of art that way that are speak to so many people, that yes, with climate change, we need art and artists to be involved, and they are. I think about something like the group Extinction Rebellion. Have you guys heard of them? They're based in the UK, but they do like these really outrageous sort of street art things. They're protests, but they're also extremely creative and artistic, like they do theater in the streets. And I love that. I love thinking about really, waking people up on different levels, not just here are the facts. Because that's not working. Like we've had the facts for a while.
I like the phrase you mentioned, crisis of the imagination, because that colors the book so much as well. And one of the things that I was finding appealing about the book was that the main characters at least, are drawn to engaging with this problem, the climate change, or what they experience in their own lives and in their own ecosystems. They're drawn to engage with that because they love it. And it's not because they want to make money off of the solution, or they work for a company that's involved in doing some specific thing, or getting caught up in some strictly ideological position. They really do, in the inner world of the novel, care about their surroundings and their experiences. So yeah, I think they kind of have that imaginative element going on. So yeah, I appreciate that. I guess we can just kind of tackle the two main characters and set up a little bit of their arcs. You mentioned one of them is set in North Carolina, Astrid. The other is set in Alaska, Elise. So do you want to say a little bit about who these characters are and how they take off from the start of the novel?
Yeah, I'll do that. But I just want to make one response to what you
Oh,
said
sure.
about that they love it. Like that is so important. It's really important to not feel just a sense of obligation or responsibility, because that's it's pretty much a slog when you do. And I was thinking about this quote that I've had in my head for I don't know how long. I probably learned it when I was in undergraduate school. Philosopher whose name I'm I'm spacing on right now, but the quote was something like, "Your path is at the intersection of your great joy and the world's great need." And so need and joy, you've got to have some kind of delight in it, delight in existence, as Thomas Berry said, or it's just, So the characters, so Elise is an empty nest mother artist in Anchorage, Alaska, which is where I live. And Elise's two sons, recently fledged. Her husband is a doctor. He spends a lot of time gone. He works with Doctors Without Borders. So she's kind of both women are at this point in life that for women has often been called their second spring, or what can be called too like a coming of age, because they've reached that point, and this happens for men and women, but seems particularly poignant for women that, their careers are established, they've raised their kids, they have a home, they're married or not, they have whatever, relationships they're going to have, they're in whatever community they're going to be in. There's all these things that we spend a lot of our, 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s kind of trying to figure out. And then they kind of have some time on their hands, or like there's like this opening, and they're like, Or maybe it's that point in life when you go, well, what is the meaning of my life? Like, why am I here? And people reach it at different ages. But so Elise is at that point, right? Because her kids are fledged. Her husband's gone a lot. He has his career is all, right. But she's like, I'm an artist, but I don't paint much. I only paint on Wednesday mornings, And as a writer, I can, that comes straight from my life, right? And then Astrid is, she lives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She's a paleobotany professor at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Is married to a guy who also teaches at the university, and she has her sort of coming of age moment revolves around the fact that here she is kind of in the top of her field. She's tried being the head of the department, really didn't like that, really just wants to, do her research, just wants to sit and look at these fossils, these plant fossils, and think about the past. And very sort of meditative thing. But, the world doesn't let us do that very much. And there comes an opportunity for funding, which she turns down. And so it creates a lot of reverberations. But they're also both experiencing things outside of their personal lives that shake them up, that it's kind of like, do I just ignore that, or do I do something about it? Do I leap? And I think that idea of to leap or not to leap is central to the book.
And I was thinking too about how the two characters sort of handle that point and then that transition differently. Elise, I found to be more an emotional gut response to a lot of the things that occur in her storyline. And then Astrid, of course, is more cerebral, it seems like. So are these two characters too meant to contrast in how they deal with this point of change?
Astrid is, she's very much in the sciences, and not just in the sciences, but in basic research, which is like you don't even have a problem you're trying to solve. It's basic research. It's just learning for the sake of learning, which I love the idea of. And so she has a very, she's just been very trained in that. And so it's very hard for her to shift. It's very hard for her to, listen to what her professor, Striley, who's like her mentor, is trying to tell her. She's having a hard time hearing it. Whereas Elise has these sort of emotional awakenings, I think, more. But they both have these emotional awakenings in these moments where they're alone in nature. And this occurs throughout the book. And it's an important theme for me because it's really critical. It's what Virginia Woolf called moments of being, or another writer, Mary Austin, called flashes of mutual awareness. And like if you've ever read Annie Dillard's essay, Living Like a Weasel, I think that's what it's called. It's about her encounter with a weasel where she feels like she and the weasel all, for a moment, exchange identities. You know, that kind of moment you can have in the natural world where you just like the veil drops and you're not just this solid being separate from everything else. So it happens to both of them. With Astrid, it comes more through her memories of childhood and her mother, because her mother is more of a feeling, emotionally connected person. But she resists that because of her relationship with her mother and her father and her memories of all that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the memory topic, among other things, but maybe it's a good time to insert it now, just in terms of like how impactful the characters' memory of their own pasts are, and how they really don't they don't shake things that have happened in their pasts, and then ultimately are kind of motivated to do certain things because of them. So, like, how conscious was that? Was that something that was really something that was prominent for you writing the book, engaging with, memory and how that affects a person, just in terms of like, the human experience kind of thing? Was that something big for you, or just kind of baked in?
It was, that part was a surprise, actually. I mean, I want to say that, even though I talk about it as if I understand exactly what I was writing when I was writing it, a lot of the times it was just the characters, and I was just kind of their recorder. I mean, I'd never written fiction before. And I just kind of had these two women that actually appeared to me first in dreams, and they kind of just wouldn't leave me alone. And so I just would sit at my, morning writing time where I didn't have anything I was planning on writing, but I was just writing and just start playing around, letting them speak. And so a lot of that was a surprise to me. But I can say that I think that memory is really important to us throughout our lives. I mean, we are who we are because of many things, among them all of our past experiences, whether we remember them well or not, and like I'm one of 6 kids, so we'd have an experience as kids and then we might talk about it later as adults, but we all remember it differently. So there's that going on too. I mean, memory is very fickle and we know that, but it also weaves into our lives a lot. But that, a lot of the book, I didn't have an outline or anything. And I just kind of let it happen, let it see where it wanted to go or where they wanted to take me, because that was fun. It was fun to not know where I was going. And I've written essays kind of like that, but they're all nonfiction, so that's different. This is fiction, and so it could go places that I didn't even know existed. But I can look at some of the sections and I can say, oh, yeah, that kind of came from this thing that someone told me, a few years ago, or that kind of, I could kind of see the sources later, but not necessarily while I was doing it. I mean, I never thought I could write fiction until I knew fiction writers and saw how they didn't just pull it entirely out of thin air. It's not entirely out of thin air. It's based in some level of their human experience. They still start with what they know, and then they write into the unknown. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, and yeah, just to kind of like set the scene a little bit or color it in, like both main characters have like childhood experience that then kind of, consciously or not, and sometimes it's not even conscious, kind of comes back, through the novel. So,
Mhm.
yeah, even like you mentioned, childhood memories, yeah, they play an impact throughout our lives. So yeah, and then yeah, Ashley, when we talked about the novel, it brought up this idea going back a little bit of like nature providing that respite, but then also being the kind of the source of the anxiety with um, the changes that are taking place, even just ones like a person witnesses where they're at. So yeah, maybe you can like speak to that a little bit in terms of how that developed in your reading.
Yeah, so I loved all of the natural descriptions, first of all, in the novel. I really, really enjoyed them. I loved the descriptions. I loved that it was two sort of contrasting landscapes. You had North Carolina, and then you had Alaska, which really connected with me personally because I grew up in Colorado and then ended up moving. I'm your neighbor to the north in southwestern Virginia here. So just that those two contrasting landscapes really resonated with me. And then, of course, there's a couple other places that get described later on that I won't give away. But I noticed that the characters, Elise especially, but Astrid also, they have these experiences in nature, and sometimes these experiences are very peaceful, and they are feeling the most at peace, and nature is a respite from everything that's going on. But at other times, they're out in nature and they notice a change or they notice something not quite going right, and then it's just this source of pure anxiety. So there's sort of this dichotomy of nature as respite and nature as anxiety. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I hadn't really consciously thought of that. So I think that it's that collaboration idea where there's, there's the human interactions, which we're very used to in stories. But in this novel also, I wanted my characters to have relationships with non-humans. So for Elise, there's a polar bear who lives in a zoo. Not even just a generalized polar bears, but a specific polar bear. And for Astrid, there's that ginkgo tree on campus. There are other beings that they have relationships with. And so, as with any relationship, sometimes it's just a source of solace and ease and quiet, and coming home to yourself. And other times it's a source of, kind of kicking you, like kind of kicking you in the butt to say, well, wake up. And so I think that is just part of the overall relationship. This just draws heavily on how I experience life. I feel a certain kinship with certain trees on my walks, and if one of them gets blown over by a windstorm, I've lost a friend. And I think that feeling that level of relationship is important. Because it goes back to what you said, Erin, about they don't just do it because it's their job. They do it because they love it, and they do it because they love it. Like they love these trees and bears, and I think that love can propel us into such creative action. So I think that that's really important, that it's not just a sort of romanticized, I go to nature to find peace, even though a lot of times that is true. But, I was looking at an article the other day about research about why we are able to focus better if we spend time in nature. And they had students go like for 20 minutes on a walk through a mall, and then other students went on a 20 minutes walk through the forest. And they noticed that the ones that went to the forest had like 20% better focus when they had to do memorization questions when they came back. Like, so there's so much we get from it, right? And I think it's funny that they do research like that, because I think we just kind of know that, right? But we must study everything. That's fine. So I think in the book, I really wanted to show the depth and breadth of the relationship with the non-human world.
One other direction we could go, I think that's relevant here, is like those boundaries get a little blurry, I think, throughout the book. That's, I think, one of the things that I appreciated about it is we kind of set up these seemingly like oppositional, science and our Right, two different things, two different types of people, two different types of thinking, two different buildings on campus, whatever. Um, but I think, one of the phrases I wrote down is like the illusion of separateness, which I think the book engages with. These things aren't really that distinct. Um, so, we played around with, things like even the respite versus anxiety. Well, there's kind of both that are mixed in, even just to your walk through the woods. Art as expression versus art as propaganda, or to support an
Yeah.
ideology or economic interest. The meaning of the art versus its message. On the research side of it is like, is it personally interesting to the researcher versus, something that's useful to whoever's funding the research? Learning versus application, or like the, basic research versus applied research. So I think small actions versus global actions. The one person planting one tree versus, something that affects a global scale. And yeah, at some point, the one tree kind of that is the same. It is one and the same as the global scale impact. So yeah, does that I guess that's a long way of saying it. Does that strike you as a phrase that applies to the book at all? Illusion of separateness?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for seeing that in it. I really appreciate that because I think that that is a really important theme, that this illusion of separateness gets us into so much trouble, in our personal lives as well as, our larger careers or politics or whatever. It really gets us into a lot of trouble and gets us into a lot of fear-based places because we're trying to protect this separate thing we call ourselves. And it's so much more delightful to let go of that, and just feel part of the whole. And now I'm going to sound all spiritual, but it's just, it is just a real relief. And I think for the characters in the book, that often does come when they're in the natural world, because the natural world is it reveals that, like it's always that way. There's not that, like, thinking about collaboration, like, you see collaboration in the wild world all the time, whether it's ravens showing wolves where, a winter kill is and then eating off the scraps, or whether it's, birds at a bird bath sharing space of, many different species all at once. There's just a lot of collaboration and cooperation going on. And I think it's because there's a sense of, there's just a sense of oneness that I'm trying to remember. It might have been Thomas Berry, but another environmental philosopher who said, humans are so lonely because we have removed ourselves from everybody else in our little houses, and we don't, and it's just very lonely. So I think about that a lot, and I think how sad when we don't have that connection. So that feeling of oneness, it just first comes through just deciding to connect. Like a lot of people are doing, what do they call the forest walking now? There's like a term for it, where they go out and they walk slowly through the forest bathing. That's what it's called. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just a matter of intention, right? You just go out there and you're just walking among the trees with the intention that it's going to calm you down. And so you just start that way, and then you just have to kind of let go of a lot of expectations of what's going to happen.
Yeah, I noticed in the book that a lot of the characters who seemed, for lack of a better word, happier or most at peace were the characters that were really focusing on the small actions of just like quotidian everyday life, as opposed to the ones who were trying to, in that moment, feel like they had to save the world or make a huge change. But instead, when they were more focused on the smaller tasks of maybe planting a tree or tending a seed or cooking a meal, even, those characters were the ones who were most sort of self-possessed and in themselves, and we're feeling the most joy, whereas the ones who are really trying to focus on that bigger picture, we're sort of getting lost in that moment anyway.
Yeah, I think it just comes back to that intersection of great joy and the world's great need. So if you're cooking, you're feeding someone, like you're doing some good thing. And you're not just feeding them, but you're giving them something delightful, like it's a joy to eat good food. And so I think that those characters have found that intersection, and they're happy there. And some of them might have found it and been happy in that for a while, and then they go off in another direction, and that's okay too. Like, we don't have to do one thing all our lives. I don't have to just write poetry. I can write fiction too, or I can go, well, you can do anything, and that's kind of the fun of being human, or being alive on the planet, is that you have this life to play with. And so that sense of play, or that sense of joy, is really important. And this sense of feeling like you need to do everything all at once is just stifling. And it's easy to get there because everything seems so dire and seems so end of world, really. I have a hard time, but I always try to think, if I'm reading the news or I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next, I always think, like, what can I do about it? As one teacher said, she said, if you have something that hooks you and causes anxiety or fear or whatever, look at it and say, why does this cause me fear? Is there anything I can do about it? If there's nothing you can do about it, then why have fear? Why have anxiety? There's nothing you can do about it. So let go of that, If there's something you can do about it, then why have fear and anxiety? Go do that, So it's kind of like, it seems very simple. It's very hard to put into practice. But, I think that it's important that people not kind of spin out and feeling overwhelmed, which I think is very disheartening for folks to not. And so I tried to show that with my characters. I tried to show that sense of, I'm cooking. This is what I do, and I do it really well, and I'm happy about it. And I get to feed people. I get to feed them well, and that's good. That's good.
The scene that comes to mind just at the very beginning, which sets things off in the beginning of the novel, is the one character, Elise, who sees, like, the the news headline at the grocery store or something about, like, the polar bears and the melting ice. And so, like, of course, we encounter that media message, whatever topic it's on, fear, anger, ignorance, whatever mixture of those three things you want to play around with, but we kind of see the message via media all the time. Be afraid. This is happening. Crisis, catastrophe, disaster. And yeah, I guess we're not probably going to stop that from happening. But the interesting thing over the course of the novel is that, yeah, Elise finds her way to navigate and uses that for her artistic endeavors. And even just practically, like visiting the zoo, like you mentioned, visiting that one particular polar bear and kind of building that relationship on that level as well. So yeah, I didn't prepare you for this, but are you able to read a passage or even just even a poem, just to mention that if you're able and willing?
Let's see. Well, I guess I could read a little bit from the book. I think, since you brought up Elise and the polar bear, so just a little background. Like, in the beginning, we learn, like, Elise really doesn't like zoos. She doesn't like the idea of zoos. But when her boys were young, she brought them there because, that's what you do. and so then later she's asked by a friend to go to the zoo with a group of school kids, and she sees this polar bear and is just drawn to this polar bear. Binky is the polar bear's name. And so then she just starts to go back and sit with this polar bear. And she's an artist, so she's also thinking, I'm going to draw a polar bear. How can I do this? So here she is sitting with the polar bear. Elise is daydreaming in front of Binky's enclosure. It's a sunny October day, but there's still a nearly constant crowd watching the polar bear. What with fall field trips for elementary schools, an increasing number of shoulder season tourists, and the fall season becoming longer, more mild, colors changing later and later. She's looking forward to winter, when she could be the only visitor in the entire zoo. Winter, when she used to bring her 2 wild boys to the park near the zoo. So many days, no matter the weather, she'd pick them up from school and head straight for the park, carrying hot chocolate and peanut butter sandwiches. On those quiet, snow-soft days, the boys had the swing set all to themselves. They'd swing higher than their teachers let them, stop to grab a bite of sandwich, rush to the creek, revel in its icy shape-shifting. Justin, always the daredevil, jumped between ice chunks, relishing the challenge as much as his brother's laughter and his mother's anxious yells to stop. Sometimes they raised up and howled toward the zoo and waited, silent, bright blue eyes ringed by frosted lashes. Sometimes the wolves answered, their beautiful mourning for freedom ringing through Elise's very skin. If only she could paint that, she now thinks, that howling and its bodily reverberations. Her reverie is broken by a group of visitors clapping their hands and speaking in the winding syllables of an Eastern language. Binky is sleeping, curled up, black nose tucked into her belly, looking as harmless as the chickadees that flit overhead, winging from branch to branch. Elise loves to watch Binky sleep, at least in dreams, she hopes. She can pad free across endless tundra and sea ice, those black eyes seeking the slightest darkening from a seal's breathing hole in the solid ice pack. But tourists don't like sleeping animals, so they clap and yell, trying to get the animal to react. Just as she's about to take her eyes from Binky and down to her sketch pad splayed across her lap, she sees something out of place. At the far corner of one of 2 6-foot fences that surround Binky's enclosure, a man is climbing over. Her first thought is that he's a zoo employee come to do some maintenance or feeding, but why would he climb the fence? She jerks her head up as the man clambers over the second fence. He's a tourist. Yes, she can tell by his plump fleece jacket, zip-off khaki-colored pants, bright blue tennis shoes that look like they just came out of the box. What is he doing? The man approaches the cage, sidling right next to the sleeping bear. He raises his camera with a heavy black lens and, incredibly, who would do this, sticks the lens through the bars to snap a shot. That does it. The bear wakes up, jumps to her feet, and lunges, one giant front paw surging the bars to grab the brightest, closest thing, a leg sporting the blue tennis shoe. The man pulls, but now Binky has his calf firmly in her jaws. People scream and yell at Binky to let go. A baby cries piercingly. 2 people climb the fences, break off some willow branches, and begin beating Binky with them. Everyone is yelling, screaming, crying, and then Binky drops the leg, bites the blue shoe, tears it off. The man falls to the ground, lying on his back and grasping at his leg. Binky tosses the tennis shoe in the air, and it lands in the pool. She leaps in after her new toy. The man is carried out by zoo attendants and 2 visitors. The crowd stands silent, aghast, as does Elise. Then they chuckle, point, and snap photos of the white bear playing with the blue shoe. Not Elise. A heat rises from her legs to her face. Why in the hell would anyone in their right mind do such a stupid thing? What rises in that blood-boiling place is this. My bear. How could that stupid tourist mess around with my bear? And what will become of Binky? A river of fear through her chest. Will they have to kill her now that she's attacked a visitor, even if that visitor was the one who put them both in danger? On the front page of the paper the next morning, there's Binky with a tennis shoe in her mouth. That photo circles the globe like wildfire, making Binky as famous as Annabelle the elephant, who learned to draw with her trunk and whose paintings sold at the gift shop. Binky, meanwhile, tosses and tears that shoe to shreds, while letters pour into the zoo and newspapers, all with the same message. The bear is blameless, let her be. Some people send more shoes for Binky. Even the fence climber, whose leg is on the mend, agrees that the bear is not at fault. Just a stupid tourist, he's quoted as saying, so Binky is safe. But her enclosure has new and higher fencing, along with signs every few feet stating the obvious. do not climb the fence. The signs, the fence, the entire spectacle all make Elise feel even farther away from the polar bear, farther away from finding whatever it is she's looking for. After a few more attempts to paint that luminescent fur, she gives up. Instead, she begins to sit and wonder what she can possibly do for all the wild polar bears who are also, thanks to climate change and their disappearing ice, moving farther away from her. So I just want to say that actually happened here in Anchorage with a polar bear. So that's where my nonfiction writing slips into my novel. Always struck me as crazy. But anyhow, it's a moment for Elise where she really struggles with, Ashley, what you were talking about, where she feels the immensity of the problem and is lost in what can she do.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thanks for reading. Real Pro has the book handy, right on the desk. So yeah, that's an excellent little scene, and like you said, kind of merges nonfiction and fiction. So that's a fitting example. I will post links to the book. It's out of the University of Alaska Press. You can get it wherever you get books, but I'll put a link to the publisher website, and it is available as an ebook.
It is
to purchase as well as as paperback.
Yeah, it's available on all the ebook types, Kindle and all the rest, and it's available, anywhere books are sold. So you can get it online anywhere. You can go to your local bookstore and they can order it. If you have a bookstore where you live that you love, that's a nice thing to do for them. So yeah, it's available ebook and paperback.
Awesome. Yep, and I'll link your website as well. Is it marybethholleman.com, so people can find you and find your book. So thanks for joining us. Thanks, Ashley, for joining in for this episode. Great talking to you as always, and talk to everybody again soon.
Thanks so much, Aaron.